Hi, welcome to the video issue of Finance 201, the March 2021 edition. This edition covers a very simple concept, a year in the life. See, it's been a year since we all assume that the advent of COVID began to affect our lives. Now, as a business owner, you've had three dynamics that you've had to address. One is, how do you serve families? Two, how do you provide the proper stewardship and care for your employees? And three, how do you provide for your business? Today, I'm going to cover those issues by talking to two people that have kept their privately owned multi-location businesses alive for the past year. David Hernandez has multiple funeral homes and cemeteries, mainly in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, but for the last couple of years in West Virginia. Noel is one of the owners of a very prestigious operation known as Walton's in and around Reno, Nevada. Both of these two gentlemen told me what they did to address these three issues. My guest in Finance 201 this issue is Noel. Rick is the longtime general manager of a very, very substantial business in the Reno, Nevada, northern Nevada area called Walton's. Rick, welcome to Finance 201.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate you having me on.
Rick, tell our viewers a little bit about the Walton's business. How many locations do you have?
So, Dan, we have here in Nevada, we have 10 funeral home locations and we have one cemetery. And then we have an 11th funeral home location in Susanville, California.
Rick, when you talk about your business being affected and your community obviously being affected, what were the staff and other issues that you had to manage?
Yeah, so it's interesting, Dan, that during that initial wave of the pandemic, we noticed different things in different ways. That in that first wave, we actually didn't have or felt very little impact operationally or with the staff, other than the initial fear and anxiety they had, like many did, with so much being unknown about the virus. So we experienced that, and then of course a little bit of added stress was there with shortages of personal protective equipment, sanitizing products, and whatnot. So we did experience that, but then we've neared full capacity on our refrigeration units. It's, multiple times. And so,
about how many cases in a typical year will your company serve overall?
Yeah, company-wide, we're on pace to do about 3,300 deaths this year. That would be our normal without COVID. So I'm waiting for the final numbers to come in for year end. They'll still need to be finalized, but so we could be beyond what I expected. Could be closer to 3,350, I would guess.
And how much refrigeration ability do you have?
Yeah, it's quite large already. We have currently have 3 large refrigeration units in our family care center, soon to add our 4th, and then our Carson City location has 2 with the 3rd one that's being added this week. It'll be operational. So like I said, with a company our size, volume that we do, we need that capacity. We're the type, we want to make sure we're always compliant in everything, and so we will have adequate space.
So you talked about your staff having some anxiety. What did you do to try to quell that anxiety?
Yeah, we encourage them to just treat COVID patients just like they would any other contagious disease. They need to wear their personal protective equipment. They need to be to be careful, of course, utilize more caution, of course, but just that really, with what the CDC was reporting and other medical professionals, that we really didn't need to be overly alarmed. There's other things and other diseases far, in my opinion, was far more serious. Not that COVID isn't, but certainly far more serious than COVID could be to them. And we just talked about some internal procedural things with how when we move remains and remove them from a bed or a hospital, bed or the morgue or something like that, that we would always cover properly the deceased, so that we have protection for our people.
Rick, you mentioned the anxiety of your staff. Would I be out of bounds asking about the anxiety of you and your business partner, who just a few months before the awareness of COVID made a major investment to buy this business?
Absolutely. We had some anxiety that we shared amongst each other, but not with the staff, so as not to alarm them. It was a trying time for us, for sure. And like, as you know, so much was unknown in the beginning. We didn't know where this was going to go. We just had to be diligent to do what we know how to do, and to make sure that above all, we didn't disrupt the way that we care for families. It's so important. We believe what we do is vital to our community. And so we wanted to make sure that we didn't panic our staff, we didn't panic the community, but that we took whatever precautions we needed to. And there's a lot of prayer.
Rick, are there any staff training issues that you found were very important to institute or reinstitute during COVID?
There's a couple of things. I think to start though, the first thing, Dan, is rather than change what the staff was doing, we wanted to reiterate to them the importance of what they do every day and what a powerful impact they make on the lives of the families they serve. This is true. And so in spite of the pandemic, we said, you need to continue to do what you do. Families need you to keep making that difference in their lives during this difficult time. There's no shortcuts here. You need to continue to offer every service, every option. And so they were doing that. They were stepping up to the plate and doing that very thing because they believe in what they do. They truly do. I can speak that of our staff. And then in July, we had all of our funeral directors and administrative staff take part in a virtual Woolfield experience that Dr. Alan Woolfield had put together. And most of us in funeral service know Dr. Woolfield. He's fantastic. He has so many impactful things to share. And we found that training was just that. It impacted our staff greatly. They even more believed in what they were already believing in that they do. And so, they started to then share more with families about the importance, again, of having the visitation, having the funeral service, the ceremony, and communicating that to the families. And when we do that, it's a win-win because the family truly needs it. But when they have that ceremony, they have that visitation, we need it too. It helps our bottom line. So it's a win for us too.
During a pandemic, how did you protect yourself because your margins were that much thinner?
It's interesting, Ann, because my business partner, Kim, and I, we actually were thinking about this. We said, our first 2 quarters of 2020 weren't great, right? The first quarter in particular, we bounced back in the second, but the third and fourth quarters, we can't put our finger yet on what happened, but we had a drastic turnaround. I mean, I can't say it's anything we did in particular. All I can say is we just continued to cheerlead our staff. But by the grace of God, as the governor's restrictions began to lift a little bit, families were wanting to assemble again. We talked about people wanting to gather, but families want to get together. They wanted to have the ceremony and the visitations. They wanted to have the support of their friends. And so we started to see things turn around again. And we would have, even though limited capacity it was for attendees, we had ceremonies again and visitations again. And that translated into better product sales as well, better casket sales, better earn sales, just because other people were seeing it now again. Whereas in the beginning, when things were more shut down, they weren't spending as much. And so that's the only answer I've got. It's not, at this point, we're trying to dissect more where that change occurred, but that's all, at this point, all we've got.
I thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Today is David Hernandez, the owner of funeral homes on the East Coast and cemeteries now. David, welcome to Finance 201.
And it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on.
David, tell our audience a little bit about how you came into funeral service.
Sure. Well, I started, it was one of the first jobs out of high school, heavily influenced by my mother, who worked in a cemetery. So the experience of watching her in a cemetery, I saw that side of death care. But ultimately, when I saw the processions come in and the funerals, there was just something that drew me to the funeral side of the business, and had spoken to my mom about it. And she said, look, follow your passion, or where your desires are leading you. And decided to enroll in mortuary science. So my first exposure was from mom working in a cemetery, and then the rest is the typical funeral director journey. Internship, no social life during the internship, a lot of night removals, work indoors, funerals, became licensed, got a chance to manage a place, and then ultimately jumped into the arena and purchased my first funeral homes in 2009.
Now, since 2009, you've bought several funeral homes in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and your latest foray is in West Virginia.
Yes, that is correct. That is correct. So we've been very blessed.
And how many funeral homes overall?
So we have 12 funeral homes and 2 cemeteries. So essentially 14 locations.
The cemetery side of the world, has that been difficult for you to get used to? It's a totally different business mindset.
Yeah, I all this makeup is just covering up the black eyes that I've gotten from buying a cemetery as a funeral director. But it's been such a fun journey to see that side of the business. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a completely different way to run a business, to operate a business. But I've been blessed to have my mom, who was my mentor getting into the business, helping me on that side. So it's really been a fun opportunity for us to just grow and really diversify within funeral service. So it was always something that I wanted to do, was ultimately have a cemetery and then, a crematory.
David, we're in March of 2021. It's been a year in the life living under the sickle of a pandemic.
Yeah.
Your North Jersey locations were one of the very first areas to be considered a hotspot, with North Jersey, New York, and Connecticut. What was it like?
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know if we've really truly reconciled what we went through in the thick of the pandemic. Dan, it was like a light switch went on, excuse me, in the beginning of March, and it didn't go off until May. And then we had a summer where it was a little bit of a break, and then it's just kind of ramped right back up and through. What happened in funeral service, the influx of the death rate, the loved ones, the impact on the staff, on the family, on the communities, was nothing that I had ever seen before. And I had gone through 9/11, worked through Hurricane Sandy, like many funeral directors, been through some very difficult tragedies and local events that required our services. But I don't think anything quite prepared us for what we experienced back in March, April, and May, and then the resurgence in the end of the year and beginning of 2021.
David, if you had to write a book today to program and prepare the future generations for handling funeral service in a pandemic, what are some of the chapter titles that you might think to call them?
That's a great, that's a great question. I would say at this point, preparedness. Preparedness is one. Communication is another one. I learned very early in the pandemic that it was so important for my staff to hear from me, to hear that we were putting action plans in place, not only for their safety, but for the safety of the families that were coming in. So it would be preparedness, communication. Certainly, some of it is stress management. It was a lot for everyone, down from, drivers and maintenance up through interns, funeral directors, sales, to management. I mean, there was just so many different avenues that were hitting so quickly and so fast that, Dan, we were putting plans in place, and then the next day or two, we were having to change it all over again because it was just moving so fast and it was such a dynamic environment. But I'm so proud of the team here at Jersey Memorial and our affiliate West Virginia Memorial for what they've gone through. And it was interesting. We got hit with the pandemic at different phases across the different states. So what we learned was that some of our staff was really able to be guidance to the other staff that were just getting into their services through the pandemic. So it was really interesting to see how this thing moved around the country and then ultimately hit not just a portion of our company, but the entire company at some point.
David, what were some of the changes that you had to implement with families?
Yeah, so I think the first one most of us here in funeral service had to deal with was just the loss of that personal connection. Any successful firm or funeral director really relies on their ability to connect with a family. So when you're not able to do that anymore, I almost felt like we lost a little bit of the ground that we have in funeral service. So we really had to make a very quick shift in how we spoke to families on the phone, how we communicated with them electronically. I told the staff and the team members that we really didn't want to go more than at least 15 minutes without getting back to families, because they're just sitting there waiting and they have so many questions. Just on funeral service alone, under normal circumstances, families don't really know what to experience, let alone when they're in the privacy of their home or they're grieving alone or they can't even come in or only one person can come in. So we really felt that the communication had to step up. So we instituted text messaging through secure channels, Zoom, video conferencing, we collaboration, case management software. And the crazy thing, Dan, is that this industry is pretty slow to change. We can't if a bus is coming, we're probably the last ones to get out of the way till we get hit. But all of these things are up on the shelf, and they were there, and we just never really instituted it because we got very comfortable. So in a very short amount of time, we had to pull a lot of these products and features off the shelf and put it in real time with very little practice. So we had some kinks, but we ended up getting through it, and ultimately through this pandemic, we've instituted some new standard operating procedures that help streamline funeral service and I think increase the value of the service to the families.
You made a reference to how difficult it is for funeral service as a profession to adapt to change. What were some of the difficulties of change that you found with your individual staff without identifying any one of them?
Well, one of the things was the communication, and that we're just so used to a death call comes in, you set an arrangement, you may have a conversation with the family, and then they come in, right? And what we were learning was not only did we have to have that conversation once, but sometimes 3, 4, 5 times, because we had to then get the a spouse involved, or a sibling, or all the kids, or have a conversation, then have another one, or we also had to wait periods of time because people were exposed, they couldn't come in. So, those were some hard things. Also, some of it was we were just having such a huge influx of loved ones that were coming in that we had to learn very quickly how to take care of this loved one in the most efficient manner. And it wasn't all the fluff and all of the service related items that we're used to adding on to, but we still had to find meaning, and we still had to do it in dignity, and we still had to make it impactful for the family. So there's just so many changes across the board that we had to do. And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know if we could have lasted another 2 or 3 weeks in it. We had about 8 weeks of just nonstop volume that came in that was just off the charts. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced.
You talk about change and you talk about adaptation by your staff. A lot of that takes training. What did you learn about what it's like to train funeral directors?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're creatures of habit. So, and we're a big organization. We're across 3 states, and even in New Jersey, we're 75 miles from tip to tip, from our northern location to our southern location. So anytime I bring in a new product, a new service, we update a GPL. I mean, the integration of that across 85 employees is a hard thing to begin with, getting everybody in the same room and communicating with them. So what we ended up doing, which just ended up working for us, was we looked at where people's best skill sets were, and we just try to put them on the field where they're best suited, and allow others to just mold to them. So for example, I handled a number of the arrangements and the phone conferences and the Zooms. I mean, I didn't go on hardly any removals because I was literally in this office, arrangement at 1 o'clock, arrangement at 2:30, arrangement at 4 o'clock, see a family in. We had some directors that were okay with embalming early on COVID bodies when everybody was a little bit nervous with it. So we had some folks that were just handling that. We had other folks that were handling the actual limited services and just doing gravesides. Admin staff were stepping up. Maintenance, I mean, we did no maintenance during that time. Everybody was just jumping on and throwing on a suit jacket and a tie to help. So I will say that they really stepped up. I mean, we were able to train, and there was a lot of late nights of sending out emails and saying, hey, look, at the end of the day, we tried to implement this, it didn't work, or let's now add this level or this layer of service or this layer of technology. So between myself, my vice president of operations, Michael Grandy, general manager Karen Lamb, I mean, we were just constantly communicating with the staff throughout this whole thing and updating our action plan.
And if the average funeral director is 55 years old, you're obviously a little bit below that average. Was that an advantage or a disadvantage at a time like this?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, I run races, and sometimes I feel really great when I blow by a 21-year-old, and then I get really angry when a 65-year-old blows me out of the water. So,
you're coming with the walker.
Right.
I mean, you should be able to hear the clank for.
Yeah. I mean, it's so I think, look, we're not by design, but we are a little bit of a younger census from an employee standpoint. But yeah, we were able to throw in some good hours. We tried to help with some of the funeral directors where their kids were now, out of school and home, and they were the main provider as well as the main parent in the home. So I mean, we had a lot of staffing difficulties too, because we needed to make sure that they were safe, we were safe, but we were still, at the end of the day, a funeral home that needed to service families. And when that phone rings, I mean, we can't say no. We have to service these families. And New Jersey was pretty specific in one of the regulations that came in that said, you are not allowed to turn down a family, and if you are, you have to call another funeral home to pass them over to. So thankfully, with all of our buildings and all of our infrastructure, we really didn't have to do that because we were able to shift to different buildings. But it was, no is not an answer. And I think, 99% of funeral directors, if they ever get a death call, I mean, it's yes, even if you have 5 other ones going on. I mean, very rarely are people going to say no to it. So it's in our DNA to just say, yep, we'll take care of it. We'll be there within an hour, or let's set arrangement times and we'll talk. So
David, what we can see as we look back over the trailing 12 months, that the average revenue per call nationwide was less than it had been the previous year. Some cases changing anywhere from 7% to 15% downward. Did you find that because of either people's desire not to use your facility or the state's requirement that you could not have a gathering, that it caused a decrease in revenue?
Yeah, I mean, so that was a pretty significant concern on my part. Obviously, but it was second to servicing the families, right? So we knew that where we were and our normal call volume that we were going to be able to weather this storm, so to speak. So what we ended up doing was, I said, look, it's not the individual's fault that they passed during a pandemic. It's not our fault either. So we have to figure out a way to create value, especially what was very unique, Dan, that very few people are talking about, are pre-needs of people that died during COVID that were irrevocable to the state, and they couldn't use Lanois. They didn't need $1,000 worth of flowers. They didn't need 500 prayer cards, but this was all prepaid and in an irrevocable account that if you don't use, goes to the state. And some families are like, we don't want to come back in a month or 2 or 3 or 4. So we really had to figure out ways to show value to families. So we created mock grave sites. We still did processions. So where cemeteries were closing down or saying only one family member is allowed in with clergy and all this, we have a property that's kind of somewhat equidistant to a lot of the funeral homes, and we called our vault manufacturer. They put up a tent, we put up a vault lid, and we would process to that piece of property for a graveside service where everybody could stand around and participate. So we told families, we're like, at the end of that, us, the funeral director, and one of your family members can actually go to the cemetery. But this way we can gather, you can have that feel of a procession, you can go to a mock grave site, we can have clergy, you can have 50 people, it's outside, as long as you're safe and we're socially distant and we're wearing masks. But we found that something that was that simple created so much value to families where they felt that they didn't get a cheapened experience, or that they weren't cut short on something. Obviously it wasn't the full effect, but small things like that of allowing those type of services. Obviously the Zoom stuff is almost like a no-brainer nowadays, but bringing in the video technology. So
David, as you've shared with us, you operate businesses in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, different societies, different educational requirements for licensure, different backgrounds, different state governances. What was it like operating 3 different types of businesses in 3 different locations like that?
Oh, it was just every day there's something new coming out, and sometimes we'd miss some things. Sometimes a staff member would bring something up, but operating in New Jersey was one thing. It was the beginning of the pandemic. It was the most that we dealt with. So we got the lion's share of the volume in the early months. So we were prepared for what was going to come. But Pennsylvania, they went from 50 people or 250 to 100 to 50 to 10 to 25 to 10 to 50 back to 10. Just keeping up with that was a nightmare. And then a lot of times, sadly, these local governments would come out with a mandate that was effective immediately. So you made arrangements the day before with the understanding that 25 people could come in. Come 12:01 the next morning, a mandate came in that said 10 people could come in. Try dealing with a family with that, and that's not really a fun conversation to have. And when you deal with the the government, I mean, it is what it is. You can't change. So Jersey, Pennsy, West Virginia was just very different in capacities, in staff preparedness. That was a whole nother component. We're talking about service and families, but then as an employer, I had an obligation to the safety of my staff and the different PPP that I had to have in place, the different requirements that we had to do. So, I mean, it kept me on my toes quite a bit. And that was outside of handling an imminent death call, Dan. I took that very personally, the safety of the staff, because I knew that they were going home to immunocompressed family members, children, other people that they loved and cared about. So we just wanted to make sure that we kept our people safe. And it was a lot dealing with every single state, county, government, sheriff office. So I got a few grays, but I try to cut them all off. So
David, I'm curious, just following up on the last part of your question. Based upon these three different locations, I would think the social community of Pennsylvania and the political atmosphere of Pennsylvania was probably close to New Jersey in mask and other mandates of taking this seriously. Whereas my prejudicial opinion is West Virginia, being more rural, probably was a little bit more cavalier about these matters. Is that the way it was?
I would say your assessment is very fair. West Virginia was actually the last state in the United States to have a COVID case. So for them, it was just, always kind of somewhat of an abstract concept with this virus. And then once it was there, it was there. And they're a small, I think there's a 1.5 million total population in the state of West Virginia. The biggest city is maybe 200,000 people. So, you don't have these high population densities, but once it got there, I mean, it was just like, oh my goodness. So, one of the things that the governor of West Virginia did was he wasn't going to regulate church or funeral services. So we were all kind of left to our own devices, which created some issues because we had lived it in Jersey. Some of the firms that are in West Virginia don't have operations in New Jersey. So we were extremely cautious and very conservative with regards to, I shut down the mausoleums. I didn't want people just arbitrarily walking through the mausoleums. We were appointment only in the cemeteries. Funerals, we were at 50 people capacity because we wanted to maintain social distance, where people down the street, it was as if nothing had ever happened. So, when we looked at that, we just said, hey, look, we're putting safety first. And if that puts us in a light that a handful of consumers don't agree with, then that's something I can absolutely live with and sleep very well with.
David, with serving that many more families in that short a period of time, was technology a help or a hindrance in your case management?
Oh, absolute help, without a doubt. I would say, Dan, that we were able to gain during the pandemic 40 to 50 families because they were just calling down the line. The funeral directors were either able to answer them or they were trying to call them back. So we were able not only to be on the phone with them, they would ask us how much services would be for the particular service that they had asked for. While we were going through, we weren't doing it on a Post-it or on a pad. We were putting it right into the case management system. I'd say, give me your email. I'm going to send you a quote now. If you feel that is acceptable to you, there's an e-pay link in there. You can pay right now and we can get started on services. And I mean, we were talking significant services, anywhere from direct cremation to, full burial, that even if it was a 1 hour viewing, were $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 services with cash advances. And we were having a 30-minute phone conversation with people, sending them an e-pay link, and we were getting paid. And we knew that we could go forward with services, So I know for a fact, because families would say, well, we called 3 other people and they wanted a fax or mail us stuff, or they needed us to come in. And I said, look, we have the technology available. We can deploy it right now. You can see everything. If you need any changes, you can sign all your documents. We can get it to you relatively quickly. And that gave us an advantage, not only an advantage over our immediate competitors, but I think that was able to build a lot of goodwill with families that we would have never had the opportunity to service, that now we have a relationship with.
Now, I'm not asking this question because I'm sardonic. I'm sardonic, period. But a technique like you just described, where you're taking, not just answering over the phone, how much is, but you're putting together a written quote, you're sending it to the family, you're memorializing it, you're spending that extra time with the family, which causes more and more bonding.
Yep.
And lets you prove that you're a differentiated funeral operation from the person who would just say, that's $26.75.
Right.
Is that going to be something that you will continue into the future? Or once a pandemic is under control, are you going to go back to the old way?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be a case-by-case analysis. So there's a segment of our population that are going to be driven by price, and they're going to only an executive, meaning myself, Mike, Karen, or my mom, deals with price shoppers, because we understand the questions that they're going to ask. We know how to ask the open-ended questions, and not in a way for a sale at all. This is just in a way for me to ascertain what exactly these people are looking for, what they need, and taking the time. When we're on the phone with a price shopper, we're on the phone sometimes longer than an actual death call, because we've got to gain this information. And again, it's similar with what happened during the pandemic. People, we find, they just don't know what to ask. So they say, what is this cost? As opposed to saying, I need a funeral for mom, and what do we do with viewing? How many people? All this other type of stuff. So when you just spend an extra few moments, which at the end of the day is just being human, asking them what they need, because we have the services that they need, and then getting it to them. I mean, when we gave price quotes, I mean, I don't discount. I don't say, oh, this guy, the guy before is 10 grand, this guy's 7,500. No, it's the same. It's just how you are able to answer the questions and make them feel at ease.
My guest has been, for Finance 201, David Hernandez, the owner of funeral homes in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and funeral homes and cemeteries in West Virginia. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
So much from these guys. We learned that they had to be creative, that they had to reinvent the tools of success. They had to adapt technology. We learned that they had to adapt to the higher demand for cremation and the lower desire for funeral merchandise. Hopefully, there won't need to be another version of this article called 2 Years in the Life. Ultimately, funeral service has gone from 20 years behind the times to maybe only 3 years behind the time. I'm danisard, and this has been Finance 201.